And once again, thank you for taking the time to talk it through with EHN. Now, today's podcast, we're talking about self-harm. And as always, we have our mental health professionals from EHN with us today. We have Lupita Pena.
Hi.
So thank you, Lupita. Thank you for taking the time to talk about this, what I've heard described as an often misunderstood problem. So talk about what we mean about self-harm, self-injury.
Sure. So when we're talking about self-harm, it can be an array of things. Cutting yourself, hitting yourself, burning yourself. But it can also be things that we don't necessarily think of right away, like engaging in certain eating behaviors, like depriving yourself of food, binge eating or purging. Substance use or abuse can be ways of self-harming. Sometimes even staying in relationships that are not healthy for us can be considered self-harm.
Okay, so it doesn't actually have to be like a physical cut.
Not necessarily, no.
Okay, it can be the emotional self.
Absolutely.
Okay, so why would someone engage in that type of behavior?
So it's a coping mechanism. It's an unhealthy coping mechanism, like so many that we might have, but there can be an array of reasons on why people will engage in self-injury or self-harm. It could be wanting to feel. Maybe they're not able to feel. They're numb. So engaging in self-harm allows them to be able to have either physical emotions or emotional emotions.
Okay.
Maybe they are feeling emotionally drained, so they want to transfer that over into something physical. It could be something like it's a learned behavior, and so they're able to just use it because that's what they've gone to before, so they're used to that. So there's an array of different reasons. Something else that comes to mind is sometimes we look at it as it's a negative thing, right? Because people will say, well, you need attention. We all need attention. As human beings, we all need and want attention. So it can be attention seeking. Maybe I don't have the words to be able to express to you how or what I'm feeling. And so I engage in self-injury or self-harm as a way to be able to communicate that I'm not feeling well, that I'm not feeling at all, that I want to feel.
Okay, so there's a lot that goes into that.
Yes.
Okay, one of the things that I read is that a dangerous behavior largely seen in teens and young adults for a variety of reasons. And you mentioned those reasons, but for this particular age group or population, what are some of the reasons there? Are they similar to what you just mentioned?
Similar, yes. So it could have been a learned behavior. Maybe I saw someone else engage in it, and so I tried it and I liked it and I kept it as a coping mechanism. Self-harm and self-injury can really affect anybody in the population. It isn't just necessarily teens and adolescents. However, you will see, or maybe people can see things like cutting, those types of behaviors be more predominant in that age group, but really anybody can suffer from a negative coping mechanism.
Okay, and it is, I want to emphasize that when you say coping, this is a negative way of dealing. There are healthy ways.
Absolutely. And
that's these emotions.
And so that's what we want to focus on is let's find a healthier way. Let's figure out the healthier coping mechanisms so that it could be replaced by that. Right? There's usually something going on. There's an underlying reason. The best way to think about it is this is the symptom of something else that's going on. This is what we can actually see, but there's usually something underneath that we want to get to and not focus so harshly or so badly or so much on the self-injury.
Okay, so there's a better way to deal with it.
Yes.
Okay. Now, for obvious reasons, right? But why is recognizing this type of behavior so important, and what can happen if it goes untreated?
Right. It's like anything else, right? If I leave something and I don't treat it or I don't look at it, it can become worse and worse and worse, right? So self-injury and self-harm is not necessarily a cry for help or suicidal ideation, or
it doesn't have to be to that level.
Absolutely not. However, if those symptoms keep getting worse and I'm using a negative coping mechanism, then those emotions and those feelings and everything else can get worse, worse, worse. And the symptomology can absolutely get worse as time goes on. So what we want is to figure out healthier ways to deal with that, healthy ways to get those emotions and feelings out so that we can learn healthier coping mechanisms.
Right.
So it's like anything else, left untreated, it could develop into something that's a lot more severe. When it comes to self-harm or self-injury also, it could turn into a medical problem, right? If I'm cutting myself, maybe I end up cutting myself too deep.
Mm.
Or maybe a certain cut could get infected where that becomes into a bigger issue. So that's what we're looking at when we're saying it can definitely turn into something worse as time goes on. And that would be with anything, right? A physical, if I hurt my leg and I don't go get it looked at by a doctor, maybe it can end up a lot worse than if I would have just gotten treated.
So like with anything, treatment is important.
Yes.
So let's back up a little when we're talking about, and again, you mentioned that it can be any age group, right?
Correct.
But let's focus on the younger adults, the teens. Could they be thinking, why am I doing this? I don't even know why I'm doing this, but I know I'm doing it. I know that maybe it isn't right, but like, what are some of the process they might go through?
Right. And it could be something that's very clear. I've used this before, I've done this before, and I know it helps me. I might not know how to verbalize or communicate how it helps me, but I know that I feel better afterwards. And so there could be a very specific reason or regimen to it, or it could just be, I just know that this makes me feel better, so I'm just going to do it. But there is a lot of the time, a lot of shame and guilt attached to that. And so that's what we want to try to remove by having these conversations is the more that we're able to talk about it in a non-judgmental way, the better it is for anybody to be able to bring it up. Because if I'm scared, even within myself to talk about it, then what's the likelihood that I'm going to want to open up to someone else?
Right. And do they have to try to hide it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You could see it in both versions. Sometimes maybe if I am seeking that attention and I don't know how else to communicate, I might want you to see, right? But then you do see the opposite, end of that where I'm going to really hide it. I'm going to cut in places that you're not going to look or you're not going to be aware of so that you don't know and it's just a me thing and it's my own secret and I don't want anybody to know.
Okay. So then that leads me to the next question. As a friend, a loved one, a coworker, a fellow student, how do you approach this? Because you talked about maybe they're feeling very shameful that this is happening. So how do you go about even starting that approach?
Coming from a place of non-judgment, a place of care, genuineness, right? I'm worried and I'm concerned. I saw that mark on your arm and I have some questions for you. Is it okay if we talk about it? Are you okay to talking to me about it? Or do you think we can talk to someone else about that? Having very big reactions, can be counterproductive.
Okay.
So
be prepared on how you're going to react when they respond.
Absolutely, yeah. And so maybe not necessarily focusing on the self-harm itself, but focusing on the feelings and emotions attached to that. I'm concerned about you. I'm worried that you might not be feeling well. I learned a little bit about this, and so I wanted to bring it to your attention because I noticed this within you or your behaviors. And coming from a place of I care, and maybe I don't know the best responses, but can we together talk to someone about this? That's always really helpful. No judgment, genuine, coming from a good, caring place.
Now, what is their initial response after that initial approach and conversation? Is no, everything's fine, I'm good. Do you leave it alone? Do you come back to it? Or do you have to feel the situation?
So I think it depends on what your relationship is with that person, right? If you're an adult or a family member, that can be very different than if you're a friend. I always recommend it's okay to let someone know. If it's coming from a place of concern, I'm going to let someone know that might be able to guide you, might be able to give me more information. And you can have someone say, well, I don't want my friend to be mad at me.
Yeah.
And so I would much rather a friend be mad at me and knowing that they're getting resources or information that might help them later.
Okay.
And so it is important to let someone know if you're concerned for a person.
Okay.
It's okay.
And on the flip side of that, what you want to avoid saying or avoid doing. I know you talked about the reaction, but can you talk a little more about it?
Sure. So one thing that I look to tell parents is you don't want to shame them.
Okay.
You don't want to automatically take that coping mechanism away from them, right? Because the more you focus on the self-injury, the more the self-injury, which is that symptom, right, is looked at. There's more shame, there's more guilt there. You want to focus on who can we talk to? How can we get you feeling better? And what are healthy coping mechanisms that can replace these negative ones?
That sounds like an important part of the conversation, right?
Yes.
There's a better way to deal with this.
Yes.
Let's explore that.
Yes, it's not you're in trouble for doing this. I can't believe this. You're doing this to yourself. That's a lot of shame and guilt there, but I'm really concerned. I want you to feel better. Maybe we can talk to someone, a professional that's going to be able to assist us that can help you. Maybe it's not me that you're going to be able to open up to, but it's someone else. And that's okay too. Sometimes we feel offended if they don't want to talk to us about it, but it's totally fine if they're talking, whoever they're speaking to, they're opening up to, that's perfectly fine. But the more, if there's anger, if there's guilt, if there's shame, there's that likeliness that person's going to shut down even more and further, and they're going to hide it more and better.
Okay, so if an example of being careful with your response. Okay, so you approach someone and like, what if they showed you, well, yeah, I've been doing this, but your response is like, oh my God, you don't want that.
You don't want to shout out, oh my God, I can't believe this, and that naturally could be your response. And if it happens, it happens, right? It happens. Coming back and saying, you know what, I'm nervous. I want to learn more about this. That reaction is not what I would have wanted. I want you to feel safe and comfortable. So it's always okay to come back and say, you know what, that was not my reaction. Apologize for having that reaction. Let's talk about how you're actually feeling. Because if you don't know and you see something and you might, essentially that could be your shocked reaction. But circling back and letting the person know that you are a safe place for them to talk to, someone that is going to be available to them, or that you will find those answers together if necessary.
Okay. Would you say this, and maybe you don't have an answer to this question, but is it more common than we think? Or is this something that is relatively rare?
More common than we think. Okay. It depends, depending on what you do for a living, you might see it more if you're working at somewhere like where, here we work for this agency or working in schools. It might be something that you're used to seeing. But what I've found working with clients and out in the community is a lot of people are not aware that it's there, but it's happening a lot more often and consistent than we believe it to be true.
Okay. And I believe I heard you or one of our coworkers mention that even in the sense of like exercising too much can be a form of self-harm. So anything that does it like physically cause you harm? I mean, it
can. Yeah, I mean, so you can physically, if you cut yourself, you can physically feel that, or at least you would assume. But, exercising, maybe you're not necessarily feeling physical where it's hurting, but if it's causing some type of harm to you emotionally or physically in some capacity, to your mental health, to your relationships, then that's what you want to look at. In an excess of anything, right? It's all about balance. It's all about, so you can say, well, I'm at the gym.
Right.
This is a healthy thing. Right. But if your body's not able to keep up with the exercise and you're not consuming enough calories, protein, all those other things. So then essentially there is harm being done to your body because it's having to exert itself in other ways.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, as we wrap it up, is there anything that we missed or a very important message that you want to make sure that the listeners and the viewers take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I think that the main thing that I really want to put out there is the more that we talk about subjects such as these, the less shame there is attached, the less stigma there is attached to these topic areas, whether it's this one or anything else that has to do with mental health. And I think this is a big one and an important one. Like I said earlier, it is probably happening more than we know. And the more we talk about it in a non-judgmental way, coming from a genuine place and trying to understand. Sometimes we're scared of the things that we don't understand. And that's okay, we don't have to understand it. But the more that we're able to talk about it and learn from it and learn about these types of topics, the better it is for everyone.
Okay. And I also want to put out there that we do have our 24-hour, what we call crisis hotline, or even 988. So let's say I suspect that this may be happening with a child or a friend of mine, and I don't know how to handle it.
Yes.
We can, we have that resource where we can call 988 or the 24-hour help hotline, what I like to refer to it.
Yes.
And that is 915-779-1800. And we will have mental health professionals like yourself who can help navigate and guide us through that.
Having those conversations, they can give you tips on how to bring up the conversations, who you might be able to tell or to talk about, give you different ways that you can either bring up the conversation. So there's assistance there to be able to help you with that.
Okay. And you mentioned having these conversations is one of the first steps.
Yes.
So we appreciate your time and helping us and explaining to us what this is.
Of course, my pleasure.
Thank you, Lupita. And again, those numbers, it's simply 988. You can call or you can even text that number, or the help Mine is 24/7. It's operated by our mental health professionals. That is 915-779-1800. Thank you very much for talking it through with the HM. We'll see you next time.